their accomplishments,
Right.
right? Because we go through and we do something that's super hard, like, I don't know, change everything about your life.
Right.
Maybe giving up alcohol or food, or doing some difficult thing, and then and how do we go about celebrating that? Which I think is a great point. How do we go about celebrating these things? One of the things that happened to me recently was I just wasn't feeling great. We get that way, right? Like, it's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies and happy, joyous, and for no particular reason. I have zero reason today to be upset about anything or ungrateful about anything. But there's a natural tendency to sometimes just not be high vibration.
Sure.
And when I get in that space, a lot of times I won't recognize I'm in that space until I'm in it for a period of time, and coming out of it takes work. And so I was walking around my house. I was feeling a little bit, I wouldn't say depressed, but I wasn't
Maybe
vibing.
melancholy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was a little melancholy, which I don't like to be.
Sure.
I don't like to
Yeah.
be in that space of melancholy. And throughout my recovery process, there has been some amazing accomplishments, and I don't really know how to express my pride in those things without this thing in the back of my head saying, you need to shut up about this accomplishment. You don't need to tell anybody about it. You don't need to talk about it. But some of those things were like the races that I've done. And I started my very first half marathon. It was a 13.1 mile run, and I finished it. I gave that medal to my mom.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
My very first one, because she believed in me first, and then I've done several after that, but they hang right where I go from the living room into my kitchen. They're hanging on the wall there. My medals, my kids' medals, Avery's medals, all of our medals are hanging there from all these different races. And I felt like, wow, I just kind of stepped back and looked at that and was kind of in awe that those were mine.
Right.
And I was detached from the emotion of like really feeling the accomplishment that comes along with how much work it took for me to get those medals, because it's not necessarily the day of the race. It was all the work up to that race. And then it was completing that race, finishing it to the point where I got the medal, where I earned the medal honestly. And so I put them all on and just wore all of them at the same time.
I love
and just
that.
kind of went through and
Big pimpin'. I can see you walk around the house with like all these medals on.
yeah. Well, I put a little video on my Instagram, just a couple of seconds, but I struggle with celebrating that stuff.
Yeah.
I struggle with putting it out there, and I'm not exactly sure why. I think that there's probably some part of me that maybe selfishly doesn't think I deserve it, or that there's still this habitual idea that I'm still a little bit phony from my past, but I think it's important to go back and measure backwards so that we can see how far we've come.
Right. I like that. Measure backwards.
So medals are great. Chips are great. That's what the chips are for. To remind you, you went 30 days.
Right. Yeah. Well, and like as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about like getting these medals and it's funny because there is that, like, how do you celebrate it without seeming boisterous, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious that in a time where I'm feeling down and I'm discouraged for whatever reason, and like you said, like every now and again, we're probably just going to get that way, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. Like, and it definitely doesn't have to mean the end of the world, because that's where my mind wants to go. Like, I want to catastrophize it and make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. But, we're going to have those moments. And so obviously in a moment like that, it is very important to step back and really take a look at these things. In your case, these races, these accomplishments that you have very visual, representation of in these medals. And so I think that seems like a very obvious moment where we can celebrate that. But I think, I recognize what you're saying when you say that there's that little part of you in the back of your mind that's like, shut the fuck up. Like, and I think that I have that too, where, that part of me will say, yeah, but you accomplished it, but
You didn't do it that fast.
You didn't do it fat. You didn't do it perfect. You didn't do it, well enough. You didn't do it in the right space. It didn't look exactly like you wanted it to, or whatever, because, like, that's just the nature of the disease. It will find something wrong with everything. Like, it's not happy unless I'm hating myself, even in a win, right?
Yeah.
So it's like I too, have these things that I can look back on and say, wow, I did that. It's pretty amazing. But I will always have that part of me that wants to belittle it,
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, but I mean, it's par for the course, right?
Yeah.
It just comes with the territory. But I love what you say about measuring backwards, because, I can look around my house and see various things that I've accomplished. Like in my case, like I sort of have a picture board, that shows a lot of pictures of, maybe some of the different projects and adventures that I've been able to be a part of, since being in recovery and sort of going after and chasing after this dream of mine, right? And it's important for me to look at that and say, wow, like, that's amazing. As opposed to those times, maybe especially like when I was sobering up and first getting sober, where I would look around the pieces of my life and see, like a dented fender and, a hole in the wall, or, just a shitty relationship with this individual, and see all the signs of the disease, working in my life. And now it's the stark opposite, right? Like I get to look around and see the solution in all these different things. And I think as long as I'm celebrating the solution, that there's nothing wrong with that. How can there be, right? And the solution is in the amount of days that have occurred, because I've stacked those one by one. I've stacked those one day at a time. And if I'm stacking them one day at a time, and it continues to be positive and leading me in a positive direction, then there is nothing wrong with celebrating however many days, I have clean.
Right.
And so I think that when we talk about accomplishments, it is important to remember that, as long as I have the proper motivation around sharing that information, that there's nothing wrong with celebrating our accomplishments. It's appropriate. It's necessary. It's a must for me,
Yeah, well, I know also, like, I love what you just shared. Like, I got a lot out of your share just now, and what comes to mind is I have to remember that I have this deep-seated low self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.